The town of Nazareth is known in the scriptures for two main events. The first, when the angel Gabriel came to Mary and told her that she would bear a son, Jesus. And the second, when Jesus was a young man, he came to the synagogue in Nazareth, was handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, and inaugurated his public ministry here in Nazareth. Here at Nazareth Village, we're focusing primarily on this event and the ministry of Jesus. The old part of Nazareth, the part that was inhabited 2,000 years ago, is in the vicinity here of the Basilica of the Annunciation today. And we are currently in this building right here. Nazareth Village and Farm are on this piece of land right here. Wow. About 500 meters from where people were living 2,000 years ago. Wow. We know that the three main crops were grown there: olives and figs and grapes. The three large crops. The major clue that told us the land was farmed in ancient years were the terraces that we found. Many agricultural terraces. And we'll see them and talk more about them when we're on the land. But Nazareth is the largest Arab city in Israel proper, with a population of about 70,000 people today. And about 70% of them are Christian and 70% Muslim and 30% Christian. And Nazareth is known for its good hospitality and its delicious food. And I can tell you it really is true. This piece of land throughout history has been so important because it's functioned like a land bridge between Africa and Europe and Asia. Major people groups and civilizations have come through here, marched through here, some of them, and some of them have stayed. So if we start at the year 2000, around the time when Jesus was born, and move on to today, you can see the major civilizations that have lived in this period of, that have controlled this piece of land. And we decided where those roads would go. Now I have just one question, and that is, what happens when those living here were not necessarily people? And when an army came through a community like Nazareth, they could come in. The Roman form of execution was the cross. And we know, of course, that this was how Jesus was put to death. Likely the vertical part of the cross was in place at the place of execution, and then the condemned person would be forced to carry the horizontal part to the place of execution. And then the nails would be put through the wrists, not through the hands as we often think, but through the wrists and through the ankles, and the person would be left to die. A very slow and painful death. Sometimes it would even take days for the person to die.
Is that about the size that you would expect the cross to be?
I think so, yeah. It didn't have to be very high.
Yes.
I mean, often in Christian depictions we see it very high. They probably put it on a high place so that it became sort of a... Now in the Greek New Testament, the word for carpenter is actually carpenter builder, with tekton, which means carpenter builder. So we believe that Joseph was working not only with wood, but also with stone. You can see the wood tools there and the stone tools here. In a land where wood is not real plentiful, the houses were built mainly of stone. And he would have needed to diversify in that way, probably. Somebody, you know, we have 4 Gospels. Somebody has said that actually we have a 5th Gospel, which is the land itself. Because if we look at the land, if we learn about the seasons and the plants, we learn something about Jesus. And we learn about his teachings. The people you see out on the land are local people, staff and volunteers, and they don't normally dress like that. They're dressed in costumes as they would have been 2,000 years ago. We also have some children that like to come and dress up and be a part of the village. They're in school this morning, so you can't see them, but they love to come and ride the donkeys and help out with the chores here. The terraces remind us of a story that Jesus told. Do you remember the story of the great banquet? When the man decided he was going to invite people to a banquet, and they all said they would come, and then on the day of the banquet, they started giving excuses for why they couldn't come. And one of the excuses was, I can't come, I just bought some land, I need to go and inspect it. Well, when you know what kind of investment it is to prepare terraces, would somebody buy the land first and then go and inspect it? They wouldn't, because they wouldn't know if it is valuable land ready to farm or whether it still needed to be developed. So that excuse that the person gave was a bad excuse. It was actually an insult to the host. And then walk forward, stepping on the grapes, okay? And you can walk back. They're squishing the grapes, releasing releasing the juice, which goes through that groove there and collects in the back. See, why did you take off your sandals? It has something to do with flavor.
Tastes like leather?
Bacteria.
Toe jam.
Toe jam, bacteria. Actually, it has to do with, if you've ever bitten into the seed of a grape, it's kind of bitter. So you wouldn't want to crush the seeds and release that bitter taste into the juice. So the feet are nice and gentle, and they keep that from happening.
As Jenny just explained, it's a time of great joy when you bring in your grape harvest. You're praising the Lord. They're harvested at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, when you're to take varieties of trees, which also includes fruit, and to rejoice. However, many times in the scripture, the writers take these methods of harvesting and pressing grapes that are familiar with the people, and they illustrate something else. In this case, not joy, but judgment. That God is going to come and judge the earth.
The terraces were here. Some of them are quite ancient. They were partially collapsed. And so we rebuilt the top part of them. The bottom part of the terraces were actually in place already. And you notice they're built without any plaster or anything between. It's just stone on stone. Allows the right amount of drainage during the rainy season. It's amazing to think that they could have lasted all this long. In the Bible, we have stories of courtship happening at the well. So if any of you are really desperate, you can come back and sit here and see what happens. And because there were a lot of people coming to the well or the cistern, there would be a lot of gossip and chatting and catching up on the news.
Cisterns they're not springs, right? Know the difference between a spring and a cistern, or it's not a well either. A well is where you just dig a hole right down and get to the water table underground. I came from Minnesota. When I grew up in the suburbs, every house had their own well. We just dug about 20 feet in the ground, you had fresh water. That's what a well is. Here you got to go deeper than that. This is a cistern where they're going to catch water that during the rainy season comes down the slope, and all of this rock here, and lots of times they'd make sure they get a good catchment area, will channel the water into that bell-shaped, sometimes be 20, 30 feet deep. Okay? Woo! Hear the echo in a second, you'll be able to look in. I'm done. Thank you for the modeling here, gals.
Are you sure it's not a toilet?
Back to you. Check it out. She's pretty, no? This gal?
All the water here, and the mud and stuff settles. I see the end.
The fresh water only goes into
In the time of Jesus, the synagogue was sort of a community building. So if they had meetings of the community to discuss something, they would come to the synagogue. If there was a need for a court, they could hold court in the building. The boys would come here to learn the scriptures. And of course, on the Sabbaths and the holy days, there would be the reading of the Torah and the prayers in the synagogue. You remember that the temple was still standing, and so the temple was the place where they went for the major sacrifices, the major festivals. But the synagogue was kind of the everyday, daily place. What was it that Jesus said that turned them around so much from admiring his gracious words to throwing him off the cliff. Well, it had to do with what he said in his little mini-sermon. He was talking about these two foreigners, these two Gentiles, who responded to God in faith and received God's favor. And God actually, blessed them and gave them blessings, and because they responded in faith. Well, the local people were not ready to hear that kind of news. They were ready to hear that God would rescue them, the oppressed people, but they were not ready to hear that God was extending mercy to all who would respond in faith.
Where do they keep the scrolls?
Back there is a little room called the scroll room. Yeah. So they would have large pots where the scrolls were kept. Probably the reader of the Torah would stand somewhere here. There was probably there was a platform of some kind, and maybe a stand for the scroll itself.
Could men and women both sit in here together?
Good question, good question. A lot of people ask that, and we've asked our scholars, and there is not one definite answer. They know that the first century synagogues did not have a separate area for women, so there are two possibilities. Either they didn't separate, they just sat all mixed, or the women didn't come to the synagogue. And we don't really have an answer on that. This synagogue is modeled after several early synagogues, first century synagogues in the land of Israel. And the measurements are pretty much what the scholars think would be right for a town the size of Nazareth. Now we are, you're 90 people, and there's maybe another 10 of us. So maybe about 100 people, but you can squish up, be room for a few more here. And the synagogues that we studied all had, they had the bases, they had where the pillars were and some of the seating, but there's no synagogue standing that has all of this part. And as you go in, think about the woman who lost her coin. It's probably a small, uneven, sort of brownish coin, and she loses it in the house, and so she has to light a lamp to look for it, and look down low on the brown dirt to see if she can find it. So you understand a little bit of her excitement when she finally finds the coin. Go on and look in the rooms if you want to.
You know what, maybe just before we go real quick, can you guys squeeze in here a little bit better? This shows you how much work there is to make cloth, to make a garment. So a garment could be a measure of value. You don't keep a person's garment overnight if they owe you money, you give it back to them, because it's so valuable. And we have Jesus' garments being cast lots for even after the crucifixion. I'm not exactly sure myself.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
You can see the whole process is that thing spins, okay? She grabs that thing and spins it, and it's going to weave one piece onto the other one so you get a long thread.
Mira, who's doing the spinning, works with the Nazareth Village children. She coordinates the children when they come here to be village kids.
You have to pull out a little bit on Kim to get the pressure on that rope. Pull it out that way. There you go.
Yes, I'm making a hole.
Joseph Maria.
Yeah, I got hit by something. I also hit my head.
This is one candidate, this little village here, for Cana of Galilee. There's another candidate just a little bit to the west of us. Both candidates are on the north side of Nazareth.
Okay. It's good to think here about the beginning days of his ministry. Let me tell you something. The mistake is often made, and frankly, it was made recently, that Cana of Galilee. Well, no, not that way. If you go to Matthew and Mark and Luke, we won't go there, and look at the account of the temptation, all jump from the temptation to Galilee. It says right after the temptation narrative that when Jesus heard that John was placed in prison, he departed to Galilee. So you get the idea that Jesus was baptized, and then he went in and was tempted, and then he went to Galilee. No. In the interim is John 1-4. John 1-4 is John's telling of what we call the early Judean ministry, because in fact, this is the way it unfolds. I like to say you're really going to be confused if you regard Jesus' baptism as the first act of his public ministry. It was the last act of his public life. he went in all naivete, not naivete maybe, but he went out of obedience. But this is what happened. As he was baptized down there in the Jordan River, as he came up, the Spirit of God fell upon him in that Old Testament theocratic anointing and thrust him into the wilderness. How long would it take you to recover from a 40-day fast?
Weeks.
Several weeks. And so now Jesus has been absent. You know, here's the interesting thing. I keep thinking of things, but you can trace John's message in 3 stages. At the beginning of his ministry, he's saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at the door. It's about to burst in on you, in the person that came. Then one day Jesus comes, and John baptizes it, but then Jesus disappears for about 2 or 3 months. And during that time, John's message becomes, the kingdom of God is in your midst. He's here somewhere. I baptized him. I don't know where he is for sure. Imagine you've been announcing it several months ago, 2 months, maybe 3. You baptized him, you watched the Spirit fall, but you haven't seen him since. You don't know where he's been. And all of a sudden the day comes when he emerges from the wilderness in John 1:29, John says, there he is. Behold the Lamb of God. That's the one. Follow him. And so now John begins to take these followers who have been following him and directing them toward Jesus. And then you have, here's the point, in John 1, you have John 1 and 2 actually, he ticks off these 6 days, the next day, the following day. Remember that, John 1:29. The next day, John had been interrogated by the Sanhedrin. The next day, he beheld Jesus. He said, behold the Son of God. Behold the Lamb of God. Then the next day, John 1:35, he's walking with 2 his followers, says, follow him. And then the following day, John 1:41 it is, I think. Then John 2, verse 1 says, on the 3rd day, he came to Cana. It is 6 days into his public ministry that Jesus comes here. And he comes to Cana because there is a wedding. And for the first time, this is the first time here at Cana that Jesus sees his mother after he had gone off to be baptized. And now, there is this remarkable wedding feast, and you know that a wedding feast went on for several days, and it was just sort of an open house, and it was a time of rejoicing. But there was nothing more important than that you had good wine for your guests, and they had run out of wine. And Mary goes to Jesus. Why does Mary go to Jesus and say, she's asking for a miracle, she's asking for help? You know, a lot of the commentators suggest that the reason that Mary went to Jesus and asked for help when they ran out of wine was because Jesus brought along all of these friends of his, and they were a bunch of wine bibbers, and they drank up all the wine, and so all she was asking was, let's run down and pick up some more wine. There's something a lot more profound than that going on here. She asked, and by the way, she knows that her son is the Messiah. When Messiah comes, what are you going to have? Every man is going to be sitting under his own vine and his fig tree. And again, the kingdom is pictured as a time of plenty in terms of grapes and olives and wine and all that sort of thing. So I think Mary goes and asks for a miracle. Is it the time yet? This would be a good place to start. We're at this wedding feast. We're out of wine. The Father chose that time to thrust him into his messianic ministry. So when he meets his mother here at Cana, for the first time since he had gone to be baptized, you have this remarkably poignant scene of woman, really a term of endearment, but being careful not to say mother. You got to understand the relationship is different. And Mary, who is a godly woman, and is attuned to what her son and also her Savior is saying, steps back, and Jesus turns the water to wine here. And you know the story, how that everybody is amazed that the better wine came later and so on.
The place that Dionysus Bacchus lived is in Western Turkey, Asia Minor. So the reader in Western Turkey reads, oh, this man, Jesus, son of David, a Jew, is claiming to be the one that provides wine. Pulling the rug out from Dionysus. Dionysus is fake. That's what Jesus is saying. He's nothing. I am the one that provides wine. And what is wine a symbol of for mankind? What is it emblem of for us? It brings what to the heart of man? Joy. It brings joy to the heart of man. It's a symbol of excess, abundance, happiness, a little bit of a nice feeling. Jesus is saying, I think among other things, there's lots more, what could have gone on, the depth of this miracle. You want joy? You Want happiness? I'm the provider. Jesus has a reputation. When he comes back to Galilee, where the synoptics pick up the story, as book said, they skip from the temptation to his coming return to Galilee. When he comes back to Galilee, he will have a reputation. He'll have thousands of disciples, literally, including some of the main core disciples that he will eventually make apostles. Now, this is the first event we're going to read about when he comes back to Galilee after spending 6 months in Judea, gathering multitudes of disciples in that early part of his ministry. He can heal with a word. If you hear the voice of the Son of Man, you'll pass from death to life. So he came back here to Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. There's a little gift shop here, and we're going to take just a moment. They're going to offer you, I told them, about that much wine, okay? About less than you take for communion. If you don't want to, you don't have to. It's real wine. The local tradition is, if you can drink a little bit of wine from Cana, though, gals, you'll be married within 2 years. So, if you don't think that's your destiny,
Hold them back.
Go on, Kristen.
Dr. Plu, it's okay. I'll get fired if it's not okay, but you can taste a little bit of wine here. Just literally take enough time to look in their shop for a second, and then we're going to head this way to our bus, and will take us to lunch. As we've mentioned, the Sea of Galilee is 7 miles across at its widest point, from right down here by Magdala to the other side of the lake, and 12 miles long, fresh water, 1/3 of Israel's freshwater supply. It's a big water reservoir these days. The deepest part, 125 feet deep. But the surface sits where? What elevation?
-700 below sea level.
-700 feet. That's why we feel this breeze right now. As around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, the warm air is rising off the land, and the cooler Mediterranean breeze comes flowing in. You see the city of Tiberias on the map? That's Tiberias right back there. Growing up the hill, the main city started down closer to the lake. You have to turn around just a second. When we are staying tonight, on the opposite side of the lake, you can see a cone-shaped hill by itself, directly opposite Tiberias. There's some green trees with houses at the foot of it. That's En-Gev. On this map, labeled Aphek. That's where we're staying for the next 3 nights. Right on the shore, they have a nice guest house. But down onto this plain, it's called the Plain of Magdala, because the city of Magdala is on the lake. The old one in the 1st century was down here by this little group of houses with the one big red roof. The modern Magdala is this right up here. Mary Magdalene is from here. It means a tower. And she was from here, and sometime she must have met Jesus up here in the Galilee. Jesus cast 7 demons out of her. Nowhere is it written that she was a harlot, by the way. That's somebody's imagination. Well-watered, good climates. And you can see it is. You got citrus fruits, you got olives, grapes, grains, bananas. The plain, it has 3 names. Because you have one city here, Magdala, on the south. The one in the middle, not labeled on our map, actually the only one is. That's going to be the last one I give you. The one in the middle, where you see there in a little dock going out, it's Gennesaret. Gennesaret is mentioned in the New Testament. Jesus will come to Gennesaret. Anybody who's sick or lame, they bring to him and lay him on the street in front of him, so he has to almost step over him, and he heals them. It's the end of Mark chapter 6. Okay? It's mentioned in the Old Testament as the Kinneret. Kinneret, it also means a violin, related to music. Maybe because of the shape, you can actually get in heights around it and see it kind of looks like a shape of a harp or a guitar or violin. That might be one reason they named it that. But we don't have any record of Jesus coming into the big city and ministering to people. Where he stayed was mainly on the north side of the lake. From Chinnereth, go east, which would be right on your map, and find the city of Capernaum. That becomes the base of Jesus' ministry for 2 years in Galilee. 1.5 years of that will be public. 1.5 year will be private, where he's teaching his disciples, guys, we're going to Jerusalem and I'm going to die. But the first 1.5 years is public, where he's preaching, repent, the kingdom of God is at hand, believe in me. That his ministry will be based on the north side of the lake at Capernaum. And you can see the little monastery where Capernaum is. It's at there's a little bay, right at the corner of the lake by Chinnereth. Go right, which is east. Then there's another bay there. And there's some buildings on the right-hand side of that bay. That's Capernaum. Now all it is a couple of monasteries. There's no village there anymore. Matter of fact, Jesus cursed the place because of their unbelief. It was one of the 3 cities where he did most of his mighty works. Because of their unbelief, he said you're going to be worse than Sodom. Ay, ay, ay. The Sea of Galilee is a big bulge in the Jordan River, right? It flows into it and flows back out of it. Bethsaida. So you got 3 cities on the northern side of the lake. You should know their names. Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida. 3 cities where Jesus did most of his mighty works. By the way, somebody tell me one event where he did in Chorazin.
Oh, no.
There isn't one. Trick question. Okay? It's one of the places where he did most of his mighty works.
That's why we did well.
But none are recorded. He did many other signs, but these are recorded, as John says, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and believing have life in his name. About Hippus. It's a cone. It's the city on the hill there. You can see there are valleys on both sides of it. Right? See what I'm talking about? The top part of it is not as high as the Golan Heights beyond it. That's Hippus. It's a city of the Decapolis. Romans with a Greco-Roman culture that dominated the southeast side of the lake all the way down to modern Amman of modern Jordan, right? This was an area of Rome called the 10 cities, the Decapolis. It was pagan, basically. Sure, you got some Jews in the cities, of course, but mainly it's Gentile. And they had controlled the southeastern side of the lake. Jesus will go into that territory when he heals the 2 demon-possessed men that were so out of it that they lived in tombs and couldn't even be restrained by chains. Okay, then you have the Golan Heights. This is Lower Golan, directly opposite the Sea of Galilee. And Upper Golan, you see it rises in elevation as you go further north. There are some old volcanoes up there on the northeast, way beyond side of the lake. Okay, that's the Golan Heights. In biblical times, it was called the Bashan. Good for grazing on the slopes and grains up on the top. And that is one time when Jesus is in Capernaum. This is in the middle of his public Galilean ministry. And the religious leaders had to come up with an explanation for how this guy casts out demons. They couldn't convince people, they knew that he was casting out demons. They couldn't convince people otherwise. It was too obvious that somehow he was releasing people from the grasp of Satan. So they had to come up with an explanation. Either he's good or he's bad. The book will go into this a little deeper, I'm sure. The people, I think, some of them are willing to accept the idea that he is good. Many did. He always had the crowds behind him. But the religious leaders say, no, we think he casts out demons. We acknowledge that he does, but we think he does it by the power of Satan. Jesus calls that the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, attributing who he is to evil. And he begins to speak in parables at that point. This is what we call the long day. It's a long day of teaching, miracles, and he begins to speak in parables of the kingdom, which, if I will, in a nutshell, I'll call the coexistence of good and evil in this age. The book will disagree with me probably a little bit later. But you can take that one and put it in a computer slot for just a second. I believe the parables of the kingdom are Jesus explaining the coexistence of good and evil in our age until the end of the age. You have a wheat field. There's some bad tares in it. Should we take them out now? Leave them stay till the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate them at the end. Okay, that's the parables of the kingdom. At the end of that long day, he gets in a boat from Capernaum to the eastern side of the lake. On the way, there's a storm. It's a winter storm. It's a February storm that comes whipping down off the Golan Heights. The atmospheric pressure is different in the winter. The biggest storm, the biggest waves come down off of the lake, off the Golan from the east to the west, exactly the opposite of where they're going now. He's sleeping. It's been a long day. It's nighttime, right? And we'll recall this later, but for now I just want you to realize he's going from Capernaum to the eastern side of the lake. Now I tend to think it's further southeast. Some people want to put it more here in the northeast. I don't care, actually. We'll probably read it here in the northeast because it's easier to get off the bus and read it there. But he's on the way into those Gentile territories. And that's where he'll calm the sea. Immediately when he gets out of the boat, he's going to meet these 2 demoniacs. The guys that he ministers to are not the mayor of Gadara, not the merchant of Gadara that could have invited him in to sip a little sarsaparilla. I hear you're a pretty big guy over there in Judea or in Galilee in the Jewish area. I'd like to, talk some theology or some philosophy with you. That's not who Jesus ministered to. He ministered to the people that really knew they needed it. Guys that lived in tombs, right? And such should be all of us, to realize that we really need it. We have to come to that point where we realize we really need him. See, Matthew 28. It's not the ascension. Some liberal commentators get mixed up and they think Matthew's describing the ascension in Jerusalem. This is a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to the disciples in Galilee that he told them was going to happen. Even before he died, he said, you're going to go before me to Galilee after I die and I'll meet you there. Then when he appeared to the angels, he said, tell the disciples to go to Galilee, I'm going to meet you there. And that's what happens here. Matthew 28, verse 16. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. Now we want to speculate on which mountain that is. Right? Maybe it's up here, a little bit remote. Could be some other hilltop, we don't know. He told them to go to Galilee, to a mountain. He instructed them to go to a certain mountain. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. I think there's a crowd with them. I think this might be the 500 at one time that Paul refers to. So we have a mixed crowd here. This is the first time they've seen him. They wonder who he is, what it is. But Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. He's left it up to us. Instead of appearing, powerful, bright light, hovering around up over the Temple Mount or something, showing everybody his resurrection hands, making them bow the knee, he appeared to a few people on a somewhat, I think, remote hilltop in Galilee. Right? Like we are, away from it. Even if Jesus was here, those people over there wouldn't know it. Right? Some of them might run over there, some of us might run over there and say, hey, there's a guy that resurrected from the dead, come see him. But basically, it's secret. Why? For some reason, God wants us to be involved in the passing along of this message.
And the birds of the air came and devoured it. Some fell on stony ground where it did not have much earth. And immediately sprang up.
Capernaum. Capernaum was a village, a fishing village on the Sea of Galilee, of probably 6,000 maximum inhabitants, probably less than that. That means everybody knows each other. The white limestone synagogue, but the rock here is black basalt. So most of the city of Capernaum is built in black basalt. When you go out to area B and A, where the octagonal modern church is built, this is more residential area. Some believe that the octagonal church there is built over the house of Peter. There's a Roman and then Byzantine tradition that this was Peter's house. I don't know. He's got prime real estate if it is, because he's right opposite the synagogue. And it's also a huge area. In any case, Peter did live here. He was from Bethsaida, but he and his brother Andrew moved to Capernaum. That's the area of B and C where you can see some of the residential houses. You'll see steps leading up to a roof area. Also in Capernaum, the man will be lowered down through the roof. The synagogue, this particular one, dates to hundreds of years after Jesus' time. In the 300s and 400s AD. It dates to the Byzantine time. There are quite a few events in the Gospels recorded that Jesus does in Capernaum. It is one of the cities in which he did most of his mighty works. Unlike Chorazin, where we have none recorded, there are quite a few that are recorded here in Capernaum. After the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus will interpret that sermon. If the book doesn't get to it, you should read it. In John chapter 6, the feeding of the 5,000. And then he will come and speak. And John 6 says, thus he said in the synagogue at Capernaum. Book?
City. In John chapter 2, early on in his ministry, he comes and brings his family here. So this was Jesus' home, and this is a very, very good reason to believe that, as Bill says, we're standing in the airspace of the synagogue. This city is mentioned more times in the Gospels than any other city, save Jerusalem, 16 times. And as we think about the ministry of Jesus, I think there's a dynamic that is much overlooked, and you really see it right in this place. Matter of fact, right here in this place. And I'd like to expand on it more as we go along in the trip. But Notice John 6 and verse 58. This is in summary of the sermon of John 6. And he says, these things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. Now, very possibly that was here, in this synagogue. To be sure, we're in a Byzantine synagogue, but beneath it is the foundation of an earlier, first century, or certainly earlier synagogue. So very possibly here. Let me tell you what had happened. Yesterday, Jesus was over in Bethsaida. He had gone there. Bethsaida will be there in a little bit, but Bethsaida, he had gone there to escape the crowds, but they followed him. He began to teach and to heal, and so many people sought him that ultimately he had to feed 5,000 men there in the plain beneath Bethsaida. And then Jesus had left, and the next morning they went looking for him, and they found him here. So the sermon that he preached in this synagogue in John chapter 6 was the day following the feeding of the 5,000, and just as important, it was a sermon to the same people who had eaten the bread. Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me, not because you saw the signs. In other words, not because you're willing to bow the knee to what the signs mean. If Jesus can do these signs, he must be a messenger sent from God. And what he claims is to be the only hope of the world. He says, you don't follow me because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. All you care about is being satisfied, your physical needs in this life and so on. And he says, do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life. I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. Imagine Jesus standing in this place the day after having provided physical bread, which simply sated their hunger for a few minutes and gave them the strength perhaps to pursue him back here. But already they're hungry again. But he says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out, and so on. Then he says this, I have come down from heaven. Now listen, you're talking to a Jew, and you talk about bread which came down from heaven. What's he going to think about? Absolutely. And that's exactly the point. He's going to go on to say, look at verse 49, I'm sorry. Start with verse 48. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. They're dead. That was physical. That's just bread to provide physical life. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. And if anyone eats of this bread, he'll live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. And all of that's part of this picture, as Jesus says, I am the bread that comes down. I don't know that there's another time when Jesus is so clear about the reality that I am not here just to deliver Israel from Rome. I am here to deliver Israelites and Gentiles from sin. And unless you are willing to trust me as entirely as those who were in the wilderness trusted God's manna and the water that flowed from the rock, you have no life. It's remarkable. It says, from that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. And the point is that this is the collapse of Jesus' ministry of presentation. From this time, Jesus, he's going to be down in Judea later on. And when he is in Judea, by the way, he's going to call down a curse upon this city in Luke 10 and Matthew 11. And he's going to call down God's curse upon Bethsaida and Chorazin and Capernaum, because the works that were done in them, and yet they refused to believe. It's going to be worse for them than it is for Sodom and Gomorrah. To quote my good friend Bill Schlegel, yikes. Think about that. Again and again, he will test them with very difficult words. Words that demand to put a fork in the road. And in this case, the fork is between the works of the Pharisees. What work shall we do? Oh, no. All your Pharisaic scribes and teachers are saying, you got to do this work, you got to do that work. I'm telling you, there's only one work, and it's a work of belief, and you believe in him that sent me. And none of that availed. And he puts a fork in the road. And when he does it, he says, you make a choice, and in many cases, it's a choice that's going to cost you something, because you turn your back on the Pharisees, and there's trouble to be had. But he puts a fork in the road, and it brings out the true nature of their heart.
The Spirit gives life, the flesh counts for nothing. The words I have spoken to you are spirit, and they are life. There's a reconstruction drawing of what the facade of this synagogue would have looked like. You can see it had an upper floor, and it also had another building which was adjacent to it on the side. There are three names for a synagogue, and the names really tell you how synagogues function in antiquity. One is a Bet Knesset, the place of gathering. So it was the place where Jewish people would gather for social functions. Their whole life centered around the synagogue. When my mom and dad were growing up, even though my dad's not a believer, everything was going on at the Lutheran church. Small village, one or two synagogues, they'd be this cultural center, Bet Knesset. Second thing it's called is a Bet Tfilah, the house of prayer. You come and the focus of the service is prayer. One of the main reasons that you come, and you see even today, Jewish people, when they go down to the Western Wall, what do they come for? Prayer, right? Not for the sermon necessarily, not for even singing and so forth, although sometimes they do it. But prayer is priority. And then the third thing, a synagogue is called is a Bet Midrash, study. Some people think that the extra section in some of these synagogues was actually for studying, but in general, the synagogue is a place where you learn and study. And we get these ideas right from the Jewish people. Pray, study, and cultural association. You can see that the white limestone synagogue is built along a foundation of black basalt. Most all this area, even the rock we're standing on, you can see it's darker. It's basalt. Ancient volcanoes that have put their lava out and the stuff has flowed over from the Golan Heights. The natural rock here is this black rock. However, in the Byzantine period, they brought that white limestone from Lower Galilee, and it would have sat like a pearl on the top of their black city. But you can see the Byzantine period synagogue, 300-400s, the white one, was placed on a pre-existing foundation. And why I say it's pre-existing, because you can see that they adjusted the thickness of the base stones, the first course of white stones. You can see them getting thinner and thinner as you come toward us. Like they had a full stone down there, but by the time they get over here, they've already got like a half-size stone. So that black basalt was already there. In excavations where they lifted up the floor of the white synagogue, they found the remnants of walls of the earlier building. Turn around on this way and look over here. The basalt is a hard rock, harder than limestone. So here in Capernaum, they were in the business of making mills to grind grain. Also olive presses, which we've seen, but grain mills, where you take the wheat kernels, we've rolled some and got some in our hands now, and you grind it into flour. If you look at your diagram here, they have a couple of them reconstructed here, and then we can look at them as well here in reality. But if you see in the diagram first, there are some bigger ones and there's some little ones. In each case, you have two different stones. Where one stone, the movement on the other stone is going to create the grinding action. Some of them are very simple, where you take a flat stone like this and you just spin it. Others, you can take like this mill here. We've got some of these back at Yad HaShmonah. I forgot to show you, but again, we were kind of just going through quickly. Where you would take that mill where it has a hole in the middle and scrape it back and forth. As the grain goes through, it grinds. Right? So the grain you put in on the top, it's whole wheat, but then as you turn the mill, you'd have to have wooden beams. You can see the sockets for the wooden beams. Here on this diagram, you can see the wooden beam would jut out on each side. Now it's heavy enough that you need two people to turn it. Okay, you see that's the lower millstone. It just comes to a cone. Then you place that top part that looks like kind of a middle of an hourglass on the top of it. Yes, there's going to be sin in the world, but woe to those who cause one of these little ones, either children or young believers, to sin. It would be better for him to have a millstone tied around his neck. You can take any one of these, even these small ones, take one of those big ones. Better for him to have a millstone tied around his neck and cast into the sea. It's said here in the context of the Sea of Galilee. Over in front of the synagogue, there are two other excavated sections. One they've just left open to get an idea what the foundations of houses looked like in the time of Jesus. Inside of one of those houses, they found some graffiti from a later Roman period with the name Yeshua on it. Okay, later Roman, 100 years after the time of Jesus. Then in the Byzantine period, they built a church there. Right? And eventually in the later Byzantine period, a big octagonal church with the idea that that's where Peter's house was. We don't know. You're within a stone's throw time. You know, the first time he came here, he does miracles on that Saturday night after he comes in and casts the demons out of that guy in the synagogue. Read this in Mark. One day, he's performing miracles in Capernaum. The next morning, they can't find him. Peter comes. They're looking for. They find him on one of these hillsides. Right? He's out praying early in the morning before it got light. It says in Mark chapter 2. He's out praying on one of these hillsides. Peter is excited about what's going on. All these miracles. His mother-in-law was healed. Others, lame and demons, had come that night after the Shabbat was done. One day of healing in Capernaum. And Jesus is out praying. I think, because he, as a human being, is wondering what's up with their response. They're not listening. Right? It's not easy to listen. They're not listening to the message. So he goes on a journey, and he heals that man when he comes back from that journey. It's Mark chapter 2. He comes back, and they hear that he's at home, and there's the crowd all around the house so that these guys can't get in. And then what does he do? He says, I want you to listen to what I'm going to say. I'll heal this guy, but the main thing is, I came from heaven to preach. I didn't come in the main to heal. Yes, the healing has the miracles have its purpose. But in the main, he came to preach. For that is the reason I came forth, he says. And there's also a milestone over there from Hadrian's time, which shows us that Capernaum was on a main thoroughfare. There are practical reasons that Jesus moved from Nazareth to Capernaum. We didn't talk about this. But briefly, a practical reason is when he moves from Nazareth to Capernaum, he is publicly making more of an appeal, because he's on the road here. And passengers coming through here, going between Herod Antipas's territory and Herod Philip's territory on the other side of the Jordan, up to Damascus. They're going to come through that next day and say, hey, guess what happened here? This man's been healed. Some guy from Nazareth said his sins are forgiven, and now he's walking around. That news will travel to Syria. That news will travel way to the south. So you're going to have lots of people affected by his ministry, since it's based here in more of a public area. In the Sea of Galilee, you get good breezes sometimes, so it helps to maneuver with a sail. But also, sometimes the wind dies, or you go to a small area, you have oars. The function of the boat is debated. Could have been a fishing boat, could have been a transportation boat. We do know from the finding of over 14 harbors, remnants of Roman, Byzantine harbors on the Sea of Galilee, that the Sea of Galilee was used for transportation much more than it is today.
Neat.
You see Mount Hermon right there with the snow on it. North is like this. That's the way I'm pointing. That's north. Damascus, 35 miles. What do we know about on the road to Damascus?
Paul's conversion.
Third grade Sunday school. It's probably up on the Golan between here and Damascus that happens, because then he goes into Damascus, where the man who had persecuted the faith becomes its main proponent. Without him, we wouldn't be here. I'll guarantee you, without the Apostle Paul, none of us would be standing here, including Dan McCurley. That's Mount Hermon. Lebanon's on the other side of it.
Now, Hermon's not in Israel, is it?
They share it. The first part is in Israel. Actually, that height is too. There's a military base on the top of that.
Oh, yeah.
That's Israel? And then beyond that?
Just barely. Everything else beyond that's Lebanon and Syria.
Well, they have to control that for the water source, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the Greek period called Banyas, or Panyas, the Arabs don't have a P at the beginning, so they call it Banyas instead of Panyas, to the Greek god Pan. But after he started to have his own worship center, the Greeks and the Romans added more worship here. For instance, the Herod the Great, and then his son Herod Philip, built a temple to worship man. Right? Sounds like Christianity. That's what Jews accuse us of, that we say that God is a man. But the Romans were saying exactly the opposite. They were saying that a man is God. There's a big, important difference between saying God became a man versus a man became God. We believe that one time, and one time only, see, the Jews are right. There is a huge separation between God and man. There is a huge, impossible to cross chasm between God and man. They're absolutely right. When a Jewish person tells you that we don't believe Messiah is divine, I would agree 100% that man is not God, God is not man. One time and one time only. And that one, it's a miracle, absolutely. And that one time when we see God became man, it was such an incredible event, he must have important purposes to do so. Here, these guys are saying man becomes God. You have a temple to Augustus Caesar. You have a temple for Pan where these niches are. It was an open courtyard. They probably had pictures, idols of Pan sitting in these niches right here. Then next to that, you have the temple to Zeus, the head of the Greek pantheon. A couple of other gods and goddesses were worshipped here. The religious holy center. It's not a coincidence that Jesus will come to this area and say, who do you think that I am? Say it again. Caesarea Philippi. Everybody together? Caesarea Philippi. Okay, built by Herod Philip in honor of the Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Caesarea Philippi. Matthew 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. What about you, he asked. Who do you say that I am? Peter answered, you are the Christ, Mashiach, Ben Elohim Chaim, the Son of the living God. And then, I'm going to skip the reading of, the book might go to it, he might mention it again, where Jesus will tell Peter, yes, you are Simon Bar-Jonah, and upon this rock I will build my church. First time we have in the Gospels the word ecclesia, the called out ones.
Jesus came, and for 2.5 years, he went about making these two absolutely stupendous claims to be Messiah, God come in the flesh. Everywhere he went, that's the way, I am Messiah, I am God come in the flesh. Finally, after 2.5 years, after discerning the hardness of the nation's heart, Jesus seeks solitude, and he spends almost 6 months before he finally gets here. Now, when he comes here, he is 3 years into a 3.5-year ministry. He's within close to about 6 months, a little more than that, of his death. He gets his disciples alone, finally, at a place near, not here, but up in the region of Caesarea Philippi. He came here because he knew he could have solitude, and he says to Peter, whom do men say that I am? Whom do you say that I am? Now, I believe that Peter had to fairly choke those words out of his mouth. I think Peter must have stood there and thought, all of my life I have been taught. As a matter of fact, all of my life, this is Peter, I have been surrounded by Gentiles. Gentiles have all sorts of gods, and they live on the hill outside of town, and their gods are nothing more than men blown big. But I know this for sure, because I'm Jewish, that our God is not a man. That's what we know for sure. And yet here's a man who has claimed to be God. And yet he's done so many miracles, I can't deny him. I've done miracles in his name. And so I think with some emotional difficulty, he said, gulp, thou art the Christ, double gulp, the Son of the living God. And I think Jesus must have thrown his arms in the air and said, amen and amen, you've got it, Peter. Blessed art thou. But it's interesting that the text goes on to say, as Jesus says, not only am I going to die, you have to be willing, if you're going to follow me, you have to be willing to take up your cross. And the cross is not a burdensome thing. I mean, it is that, but it's not some burden you carry around with you the rest of your life. It's an instrument of execution. And you take up your cross intending to die. And here's the thing, folks. When Jesus began to talk about dying, it was so foreign, it was so scandalizing to the apostles that they actually began to doubt whether he was Messiah. And therefore, 6 days later, he took 3. And there's a lot we could say here. I won't spend time with it. But he took Peter, James, and John, and he went off a little further into the foothills, and there he was transfigured. There they got a glimpse of his glory. And that was simply God's condescending way to reinforce the staggering faith of the... They'd begun to wonder if he really was what he claimed to be when he started talking about dying. That's how foreign it was to them. And therefore, Jesus takes them up. They see his glory. They hear Elijah and Moses speaking with him and so on. Then they come back down, and on the way they encounter the other apostles, and they're trying to drive a demon out of a boy. Remember that? And they can't do it. Why? Because of Jesus' claim that he's going to die. Their faith was so shaken that they couldn't drive the demon out that they had done before. They had begun to wonder whether Jesus really was what he claimed to be. But in the record, when he tells them he's going to die, in the same breath, he tells them, on the 3rd day, I'll rise again. You know what? I've seen pictures of the second coming. You know, some not photographs of it, but I've seen pictures of somebody's drawing of the second coming, and it's always the humble, self-effacing Salmon's head of Crichton. No. You won't lay eyes on Jesus in that state anymore. The Jesus that you and I are going to look upon is the Jesus whom James and Peter and John saw for a moment on the Mount of Transfiguration. The one whom John saw in Revelation chapter 1. That's the Jesus. He said, "Restore to me the glory that was mine before the world was." And he's taken that glory, but he got just a foretaste of that glory. But understand that whole episode of the Transfiguration was God condescending to give strategic apostles just a little physical taste of the kingdom to reinforce their faith that this man was what he claimed to be. Does that make sense to you? I think what happens is when Peter gets up there, hard-headed Peter, he gets up there and he sees Jesus' millennial glory, and basically he thinks, hey, I was right. The kingdom's coming. Look, there he is. So he says, I'll build 3 booths. I'll build 3 tabernacles. We'll just get it on. And that quickly, you hear the booths, of course, from the Feast of Tabernacles, look forward to the kingdom, and a voice comes from heaven, and it says, Simon, this is my son. Listen to him. I think it's in the vernacular, it's Simon, shut up and listen. Do you understand? He has told you he's going to die. This is a remarkable turning point. It's a remarkable turning point. I say it's a turning point, as I say, he's going to keep talking about it, and they're never going to get it until after the resurrection. But he begins talking about his death right here at Caesarea, right? Not in the in the regions of Caesarea Philippi.
Elijah, meet John. Say hi to Peter. Peter, Elijah. By the way, Peter, say hello to Moses. Hey. Moses. Okay, I think there's an element of witnessing going on here. As the disciples are a little uncertain with this idea of Jesus being Messiah, and the reaction of the other people. Let's see here the crowds around in the cities of Jerusalem, in the hills of Galilee. Is he Messiah or not? This one thinks yes, this one thinks no, this one thinks yes, this one thinks no. What's your belief of this guy?
Sorry. One more time.
Here's Jesus.
Yes.
He's standing here.
Older than I thought.
Now, if you are a Jewish person, and Moses comes up and is talking to Jesus, and Elijah is talking to Jesus, you can put all of the rest of Judaism on one side. If these 2 guys over here say, that's the one, you better believe that, right? That's what I think these guys are here for. It's a witness. Not only do you have the witness of Moses, and you have the witness of Elijah, but what other? Who's the third one?
God.
Now God himself says, this is my son. So I think that's part of, as well, what's going on here. These guys are going to see that Moses and Elijah, it's not going to matter to them what Rabbi so-and-so says anymore. If Moses and Elijah are saying, that's the guy that we've been looking forward to, and we put our stamp of approval on him, and they disappear and Jesus is left, doesn't matter what anybody else says.
So if God the Father is going to that kind of extent to make the point to these 3 guys, this is tough stuff. Remember now, it wasn't too many days ago. You haven't been all the way down to the Negev. You will day after tomorrow. But you've been in the wilderness. You've seen Judea and Jerusalem. And one of the remarkable things about getting up here to Tel Dan is you get to feel the, as I say, the diversity. Because as Bill says, it's like a jungle. It's not what you think of when you think of Israel, but it is very much Israel here in the foot of Mount Hermon.
Where the river starts, yes. Wow. How does this much water turn into that river we saw?
It's
Tributaries.
emerging slowly here, but you don't see it's all where it's coming out.
So it's coming out all along here, not just here.
Yeah, this is the main first
hundreds.
spring. Matter of fact, we'll get somebody to read this sign here in just a second. This is the Dan Spring, the headwaters. There are a couple other springs that join it, but most of the water that you just saw in the river comes from this spring. A karst means an underground chamber where waters have subterraneously come down and gathered, and then it pops out here on the slope of the hill. This is the reason that the Danites and the Canaanites before them built their city just beyond. We're going to climb up on Tel Dan in just a second. Now what I suggest is you feel the water here a little bit, even splash yourself a little bit. Stay away from your guide who tends to get a little slap happy. But you might want to drink a little bit. I wouldn't fill your canteen, but you can taste it.
You can drink it?
Sure.
I'm gonna drink it.
Where are we? We're at a cultic site of what location? Tel Dan.
What?
1 Kings, chapter 12. Solomon dies. The king in the north is from which tribe? Oh, what's his name first? Let's start with his name.
Jeroboam.
Right. Solomon's son Rehoboam becomes king in the south over Judah and Dan. The king of the north is Jeroboam. Which tribe was he from? Ephraim. Very good. There's the constant animosity, or even you could say contest, between the bigger tribe of Ephraim in the north and the southern tribe of Judah in the south. Both of them had great blessings. I think originally some people thought the Redeemer, Messiah, would the one to be the strongest in Israel was from Ephraim. The tabernacle was set up in Ephraim. Joshua is an Ephraimite. But the Psalm 67 says the Lord rejected the tents of Joseph and Ephraim, and he took David from Judah and made him to be king. But here the kingdom splits, and the king Jeroboam will make high places for himself. One of them is right here, and you guys are sitting on the steps, which are the remnant of it. It's an outer courtyard with an altar over it. You can actually see a couple of different levels. The Jeroboam, the first level, is the lower one. You see just beyond there, there's a square platform right where that rock landed. An earlier square platform where the altar was placed. In a later level, either Ahab or Jeroboam II, this one was made here, and they've put the metal structure on the top to give us an idea of how large the altar was. A sacrifice was made here, an animal sacrifice. It was a big barbecue, by the way. It was a big party when you made sacrifices. And then there's a square platform, which in a second you can take a look at. The size of it, you can see the front size. It's square. And just beyond this oak tree to that corner where the golden calf would have been placed. How big the golden calf is, we don't know.
The way that I think that there are sort of steps in the apostasy of the Israelites, of the Jews. And this is a big step. When Jeroboam, and Jeroboam, the kingdom had been given to Jeroboam by Yahweh. And you know, one of the most interesting things about that whole divided monarchy episode, all of those years of the divided monarchy, when you have the 10 tribes to the north that have made their own kingdom with their own capital and their own line of kings, but most unfortunately their own religion. Right here, Bethel down at the south, this way. You know what it was? He said, Jeroboam, when he set this up, he said, you know, you don't want to go all the way to Jerusalem to worship Yahweh. That's a lot of work. Religion shouldn't cost you that much. So we'll make convenient sites. And we'll put one down at Bethel in the south, one way up here in the north at Dan, which has, as Bill read on the bus out of that despicable passage in Judges 18, has remembrances of apostate religion here anyway. But the point is that even though that happened and they set up this false religion, God never stopped counting them part of the covenant. But once they took this step and they began to worship here, and he sets up, Jeroboam sets up a place for them to come and to offer sacrifices. Then he sets up a family of priests who are not Levitical, and he runs all the Levites down to the south and then down to Judah out of his country. And then, as we heard read, he set up a date for the Feast of Tabernacle. That seems what's going on, the fall feast, which seems to have been so popular. He thought, well, I'll let them go down for that, but then we'll have our own as well. And the point is that once they had taken that step, even though it was just a little, no, it wasn't just a little, for heaven's sakes, it was a hideous, hideous, wicked compromise. But it was a deliberate compromise. We're going to worship Yahweh. We're not going to abandon the worship of Yahweh, but after all, we're going to worship him in terms of these calves, which supposedly brought you up out of Egypt. He rode on the calves, or whatever you like. And it's not too much later, it's a little later, but it's not too much later that they're set up for Jezebel and Athaliah. And they come in, and we talked about that, how that in the days of Elijah and Elisha, you have the great crisis of the northern kingdom, where Yahwism is reduced to 7,000. There are 7,000 only. What to remember here is you are sitting on the high place. The priest, having sacrificed the animal here, would have walked up those steps perhaps to offer the, notice how it replicates the temple in Jerusalem. You have an outer court with an altar, and you burn the incense there, and then you have some sort of an inner house where the God actually dwells. Only here, rather than the glory cloud, it's the golden calf. So this is a memorial to a wicked, compromising apostasy.
It's a famous inscription, the Tel Dan inscription. It's important because we have mentioned in the inscription the King of Israel and the House of David. The King of Israel and the House of David. It's in Aramaic. A king from Aramea is mentioned. He comes down and he boasts and says that he has vanquished both the King of Israel and the House of David. The time of the divided kingdom. The northern kingdom is called Israel. The southern kingdom is called Judah, or descendants of David. This is one of 2 times where we have David's name mentioned outside of the Bible in inscriptions. Where's the other one? Anybody know? No, Qumran's much later. Okay, you have biblical texts at Qumran where David's all over the place. That's the Dead Sea Scrolls are found at Qumran. It's in an inscription found in ancient Moab that dates to about the same time.
Moabite stone.
841 BC. What's happening? The Arameans are fighting against both Judah and Israel. Ahab dies in about 850 BC. And then there's another king by the name of Jehu. He's fighting against the Aramean. And Jehu decides, enough of this stuff. We need a new king in the northern kingdom. He goes and wipes out both dynasties, north and south dynasties. This Aramean king is claiming the honor of that.
When Joshua conquered the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, I should say, when Joshua in his great 7-year conquest swept through the land of Canaan, you remember there were three great. He conquered it by territory. First of all, he conquered the central territory, Jericho and Ai, and then he conquered the city of Gibeon down to the south. But then he came up here and conquered the city of Hazor, where fortifications had been made. And at any rate, just get a feel for the bases. I say, for much of the last several hundred years, it was swampy and basically unuseful, and so the road sort of hugs between the valley and the hillside.
To get this chronology, Jesus goes from Nazareth to be baptized by John in the Jordan River. We do not know where. In the Jordan? Anybody can tell you if they know where it's at, they're wrong. We don't know where. Then he goes into the wilderness, probably of Judea, that we saw one day on our Benjamin trip area, that barren area, for 40 days and 40 nights. Some recovery time we can expect. Where do we find him next?
Up here.
No, we find him in Bethany beyond the Jordan, where John the Baptist has now moved away from this river, right, wherever he was, north or south. He moves away. He's an itinerant type of guy. And he is with a lot of Galileans. One of them's named Peter, one of them's named Andrew, one of them is probably John the Apostle, and that's where John the Baptist then sees him and says, that's the guy that I saw the dove come down on.
And notice the way John surrounds his testimony. What does he say? All of a sudden the phrase is gone, but I swear and lie not, but I'm telling you the truth. This is the one. I saw the dove falling upon him. You have a very interesting passage on the second day, beginning in John 1:35. On the first day, he sees John, and he says, "That's the." John the Baptist sees Jesus. That's the one. Follow him. On the second day, it says he's traveling with 2 of his disciples, and he sees Jesus quite clearly walking away from him. And then, as Jesus is walking away, the 2 disciples run to catch him, and when they and then the Bible says that he turned around, and you remember what they asked him? I always think, if you've been waiting for Messiah all of your life and all of your ancestors' lives, and now John the Baptizer, the announcer, says that's he, and you go running up, what's the first question you want to ask Jesus when you see him? What do they ask you, remember? Where are you staying? What in the world? Now, I can't prove this to you, but honest to goodness, given the way John reinforces his testimony, I think Jesus was almost unspeakably disappointing as a messianic candidate. I think when he turned around, because he makes such a big deal about it, he was walking away from them. They ran up, he turned around, and I think they were kind of caught. He said, where are you staying? And I think he's still recovering from the effects of a 40-day fast. And you have that verse in Isaiah that says, there's no form nor comeliness that we should desire him. And it's the besetting sin of Israel to think that they're better at deciding who should be. Remember Saul? Why was Saul chosen by the people? Because he's head and shoulders above. And that's the besetting sin of Israel. But the time comes in John 3 when some of John's disciples come and they say to John the Baptist, Rabbi, the one whom you announced, all men are going after him. Remember that? They're concerned that Jesus is getting bigger crowds than John. And you remember what John says at that point? It's one of the noblest points in all Scripture. Well, that's where he winds up. First of all, he says, I told you that it's wrong to take anything more than that, and I told you again and again that I'm not Messiah. I'm only the friend of the bridegroom. Remember that? In a Jewish wedding, there was sort of a little protocol. It wasn't anything formal, but because there was so much attention on the wedding march on the bride, you know, she was all decked out in her finery and held aloft, and people were, you know, reciting odes to her beauty and making up poetry and so on, and they were all headed. And so what as I understand it, there was a little contrivance where the groom, as they approached the place where the wedding feast was going to be, the home that he had prepared, he would slip away very deliberately, and everybody knew that was going to happen. But then when they got into the house, after a few minutes, people would say, hey, where's the groom? Anybody seen the groom? And they, you know, you'd feign a little bit of concern. Oh my goodness, where's the groom? And there was one person who was closest to the groom, who knew the groom's voice better than anybody else. He was called the friend of the bridegroom. And when the groom would come and maybe be singing, and that man would hear his voice, here he comes, here he comes. And then, of course, when the groom would come in, everybody would huzzah and cheer, and all the attention would be to him, and so on. What would be what would be more thoroughly inappropriate than for the friend of the bridegroom to feel bad because all of a sudden the attention was going to the bridegroom? And John says, I'm only the friend of the bridegroom. The one that has the bride, the one who's this is all about, is Jesus. But John just steps off the scene because the last thing he wants is to detract from the glory of the one whom he had come to announce. Amazing scene.
So we'll go into the theater, and then we'll take a walk through some of these city streets and the market areas. You can see where the stadium used to sit, down in a little bit of a valley. It's all built along this valley, which is the Herod Valley. Remember the Herod Valley? If we kept walking this way, this way, this way, back up, Mount Gilboa is on this side, the Hill of Moreh is on this side, and the Herod Valley comes in between them. Exactly, the shaft of the arrow of the Jezreel system. The intersection of the Jezreel Valley and the Jordan Rift, this thing flows into the Jordan, out where Dr. Plew is standing and you guys on that side, is this city. That's why it's here. It's like governing the intersection of these routes, these lanes. Okay, the whole thing was destroyed in 747 airplane times by an earthquake.
The dead. They found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped of his armor. Then they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead,
very disappointing death of the first king of Israel. Wounded by the Philistines. Where are the Philistines from? Way down on the coast. Now they're slicing through the Jezreel Valley. And Saul knows it's serious enough that he's going to fight to the death. Commit suicide. The Philistines find his body and that of his 3 sons. They cut off his head, make it a trophy, sending it in different places in the Philistine lands. You can rejoice. The King Saul, who has defeated us in various battles, is dead. And they hang his body up on this wall as a display of their own victory at this time. So you have the black basalt paved street there. Some of it's reconstructed, but you can see other stones that are original to the Roman Byzantine city where the chariots would go. And then lining it on both sides, you had a colonnaded sidewalk. You'd have a roof here. That's what the pillars are for, to make a roof. And then shops would be on the side of it. We have a couple of merchant areas. One is on this Palladia Street. We're going to see another one they'll join that cuts off in that direction. Okay, you guys, we can see that we're at an intersection of the street we just came down and another street right here that's been exposed with the shops on this side, and we'll see some other structures on this side. Whoa, I'm going to fall off that pedestal. That's what you get. Right? Get knocked off your pedestal. And then the street continues right in this direction. Look behind you for a second. See the black basalt pavement? Look at the dirt beyond. As that man was saying, this has all been exposed in the last 10 years.
Bill,
Yes.
this may be the dumbest question ever asked on any tour, but where does all this dirt come from? Does it just like blow in and blow in and blow in and eventually collect, or?
Yeah, it's not the dumbest question because it's a question I can't really answer. But that's what it is. It's stuff that blows in with dust and also plant life. Plants grow in, seeds they grow, and they become dirt. Seeds come in, they grow, they become dirt. That's what it is. In any case, it happens. However, whatever things are contributing to it, we're not really sure, right? Look at the work on these capitals and these pillars, the size and thickness of it. You can see they came down in an earthquake. They're falling this way, they're crashing into the pavement, breaking through. Okay, yeah, okay. Good. No, I'm done with that. We got to use restrooms on the way out. This probably was a temple facade here, or a podium where they had one of their goddesses, probably Dionysus or his niece, displayed. So there's not much of a structure. Then you have all these public structures. We'll go by a fountain right here, a basilica, which is the courthouse. These pillars are falling off of this temple podium. For 1 minute, yes, this is a public bathroom. Flowing water was a luxury in antiquity, and not every house had it. The rabbis say, who's a rich man? The one who has his own private bathroom in his house. So flowing water is rare. So there are public restrooms that a person would come to. And this one may be connected with the theater. The proximity here suggests so. But not always. Sometimes you just have public restrooms in the city that, I'm going to guess, you paid your tax to the city. The councilmen were making money. Or if it was a rich city, the inhabitants maybe out of their taxes already was being paid for. But you can see where it could be effective to collect taxes for a restroom. Now, obviously, the people in antiquity didn't have as much scruples about doing their thing as we do. We don't have separate stalls. We're not really sure about men's and women's. In this case, we only find one. It's probably the case, though, that the women's and men's were separate. There are different styles. In this case, you just have pillars coming out. Other Roman latrines have what really, literally, like a bench, and then a hole in the bench that looks like our toilet seat. You'd have water flowing down below in that trench underneath, in this direction, and then it makes its way out to the sewer.
Hi.
Okay, you got 12
Where are we?
If you didn't get your photograph of the theater,
Well,
do that.
I guess
And then we'll
we're
meet on
in
the
the
bus.
bathroom.
Where? Outside? There's your
The
bathroom.
real restroom.
Yeah, it's kind of broken down.
Yes, use this restroom.
Okay, but where exactly are we?
Where exactly?
Like the city?
I didn't catch that part.
Beach.
Yeah, I can never pronounce them.
Say it again.
Bait Sean?
Hey, there you go. There you go.
Okay.
Well, I feel better.
Oh yeah.
Oh, wait, where's my brush?
Hey, clean the seat before you leave, okay?
Yeah, I forgot to bring my Where'd you keep these?
Rabbi said stone doesn't contract impurity. So it was important to have a stone vessel. We see them in the New Testament. Do you remember where? John chapter 2. At the wedding in Cana, there were 6 stone jars there. Each could contain between 20 and 30 gallons. This one doesn't contain quite that much, but we have other stone vessels that contain 20 to 30 gallons, just a little bit bigger than this. They filled up those 6 vessels to the brim, and Jesus changed it into wine. Must have been a big party. Then, there's a big argument among the scholars who really lived here. Some people think it's this Essene community. Other people think no, it's a military fortress. Other people think no, it's a farming village. But one of the reasons that I believe, and I think the scholars are right in the majority opinion, is that this was a religious community set apart by themselves, is they found off the kitchen in a pantry over 1,000 common bowls, cups, plates. This is a cup, that's a bowl. Other vessels that are for common use. over 1,000 vessels. So they were serving a large number of people all at one time. Now either it was a 7-Eleven or a hotel, not 7, what do you call a hotel? Motel 6, Motel 8, one of them. It was either a hotel, some kind of a rest stop, or there were people that actually lived here. And the other indications are, for instance, a cemetery with over 1,000 people in it shows that people lived here. Either that or the hotel had very bad food. It probably was a community that was living here that is responsible for the hiding of these scrolls in the cliffs. Why do they hide them? The Romans are coming in 66, 67 AD. So they figure, okay, we'll hide them in these caves and go get them when the battle is done. Just in case we don't win. They thought they were going to win. They thought this was the battle of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. They were wrong. They hid the scrolls. They never went back to get them. It's not. Then in 1948, they started to find these. In 48 through the 50s and into the 60s, these scrolls were coming to light, mainly found by Bedouin that were antiquities dealers. Don't believe the story of a Bedouin looking for his lost sheep. He throws a rock into the cave. Baloney. Right? These guys are antiquities hunters. He's going into a cave to find antiquities. Use animal skin, and you sew the pieces together, vellum, and sew it together. The temple scroll is the longest one. It's 28 feet long when you unroll it. The Isaiah scroll is right up there. It's in the mid-20s as well. It would be stitched together, and then you'd have these columns of text, right, like this. And this furniture suggests, again, maybe the scribes weren't actually writing on it, but they may have been working on the vellum itself, developing the scrolls. The descriptions of how the community functioned are very close to what Josephus tells us the Essenes were like. It's one of the main reasons, I think, that the Qumran community here is a group of Essenes. They're not the only Essenes. Hey, you guys, if you cannot talk on your way up, just keep coming, but let me explain. And this is it, right here. We have this flat terrace that we're on. It's marl. It's a softer rock. You can look over on that side and you can see you can peel it away with a pick or something. Then you have hard limestone in the cliffs beyond us. In 2 different places, scrolls were found. In the hard limestone cliffs, which go 1.5 miles up that way, to the north, to our right, my right, that's where the scrolls were best preserved. Like Cave 1 and Cave 11, we have whole scrolls from there. We have other caves in the Marl Terrace we're going to look at in just a second right over here, where the scrolls are more dilapidated. Just pieces, postage stamp sections, some maybe the size of your hand that you have to piece together like a puzzle. The 3 most popular books, guess what? Same 3 most that are quoted in the New Testament. Which ones? Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy. Okay? Those are the most popular books here as well. Lots of people want to say Qumran are early Christians and the Christians came out of Qumran or Christians went to Qumran, all this kind of baloney. First of all, there's no New Testament found here at all. In all the texts of their interpretation, you never see the name of Jesus once. All of their interpretation points to different things. Greek kings coming in and out, the problems they have with the Pharisees, the problems they have with the Sadducees. They're not believers. See the long room right here? We believe it's the dining room. It probably houses around 100, maybe 150 people. The reason we believe it's the dining room is because this adjacent room right here is where they found those 1,000 bowls and cups in the pantry. So they could feed a significant number of people all at once. It looks like communal living. It looks like a kibbutz, if you would. Some people think that the scrolls must have maybe came from Jerusalem. They don't believe that such a community could produce 36 books of Psalm, right? So they think maybe as the Romans are coming to Jerusalem, the priests in Jerusalem brought a library down and stored it here. The problem with that is 2 things. 1, we find evidence of scribal activity. 2, the very same jars, the types of jars are found only here at Qumran, in these caves, only here. And they're locally produced. They find the same jars in the site as in the caves, and it's from clay that's from right here. Thirdly, is the main cave, this cave 4, the proximity of all these caves is right here, but for cave 4, 5, 6, etc., 7, you've got to walk right over this site to get it. You do. You see that little trail right there under that next little ridge, only 100 yards away? That's where this mother lode of cave 4 is found. Literally, you're walking over the top of this site. So to disassociate the scrolls from the site, I think it's in error.
I'm feeling like I've grown in a
You've gotten taller.
Like a 2-headed monster.
Gonna ride?
Yeah.
You're gonna ride on Emily.
Yeah.
Emily gets a stiff neck. You come complain to Isaac. Hey. If you come to the top of the Dead Sea, you go straight into Jordan.
Gotcha.
There's some greenery on the top. There's 3 little spots. It's Pisgah, or Mount Nebo. Moses then dies, and he's buried in a valley just on the side of it. You don't see it so well, but intersecting a couple of those peaks. That's as far as he got. John the Baptist, undoubtedly, I believe he is preaching in this wilderness. That means you got to be serious if you're going to come from Judea to come and repent of your sin and say, John, yes, I'm a sinner. You're going away from the comforts of your home and the comforts of the city life into this barren desert. It's a long haul. And John made it difficult, right? It wasn't sort of the comfort, how do you say that in modern church terminology? Seeker central, whatever. So you know what I'm talking about? Seeker friendly, there we go, yeah. He says, it's not gonna be, you're not gonna fake anybody out. He was serious. And like I say about John the Baptist, that guy, he was pulling no punches. He had nothing about a politician in him in the least. Ruth, the story of Ruth happens in those plains of Moab on that side of the territory, then they come back to Bethlehem. All right, let's take a look at this side now. You can see in this marl terrace, the main cave. This is sort of your atlas picture of Qumran. This is cave number 4, where over 10,000 fragments, something like 400 different books were found, both biblical books and extra-biblical sectarian Qumran literature. The scrolls are in mainly 2 languages, Hebrew and Aramaic. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem or in the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem, the Department of Antiquities offices.
And the critics would always say, you don't even know how the text was preserved. You don't know if the text that was originally written really looked very much like the text we have, been all through these centuries. And now they come and they find every book of the Bible but Esther here in these scrolls. And they're from 100 to 200 BC. So now think about that. You go back 1,000 years in one leap. And the text is, for all practical purposes, identical. One of the greatest demonstrations of the hand of God in preserving the text are these scrolls that were found here. And it's a tremendous blessing. We don't base our faith upon it, but it's a tremendous blessing. And the big problem with eschatological speculation, besides the fact that you oftentimes mortgage your credibility to the future, is that again and again, people tend to get themselves in the middle of the story. As the eschatological drama unfolds, somehow I'm the central player. So you just get yourself all in the middle of it. Well, that's what the Essenes did. They were the sons of light, and they were going to battle and all that sort of thing. That's what you got to watch out for. But the raw notion of anticipating the soon coming of Messiah, I think that's a happy notion.
Comes to this region when he's fleeing from Saul. Judean wilderness, you can get away from it all, but you do need to find a drink.
This could have been the stronghold.
Well, a stronghold's a cave, or what do you think?
Well, it's one of 2 possibilities. There are some that you have a site of En-Gedi, there's a tell not far from us, but also I think it's probably just above us. Fortified areas in the Judean wilderness, just getting up above En-Gedi.
So if you're on the run with a bunch of mighty men and you're in this desolate wilderness, but you can find a place like this, you can support the mighty men.
That's why you got all the ibex around here too.
Because of the water.
Let me orient you to what's here on this map here. The level of the Dead Sea is 1,300 feet below sea level and dropping every day. The elevation of our youth hostel is maybe 100 feet above that, so 1,200, 1,150 maybe, below sea level. We just climbed 1,500 feet. And so now we are 200 feet roughly above sea level. Did your ears pop as you came up? Okay, so that is the level of this. Now the northern section is a little bit higher. As you look down, you can see how it's kind of uneven, but it gets lower towards the south. Herod, therefore, built most of his stuff up here. You can see his 3-tiered palace right there, which is in some state of a ruin. Our Herod's palace over here, which is where he stayed, by himself. Also, you see these long rooms here. These are storehouses. There's a bathhouse right here that is very impressive to see. If you didn't see the one yesterday at Bet Shan, you want to see this one. Beautiful mosaics. The whole way that they did it, the cold room, the warm room, the hot room, and the exercise room, and the massage room, and all that kind of thing. There is a synagogue right here. Whether it was a synagogue in Herod's day, we're not sure. It definitely was a synagogue in the time of the first Jewish revolt, which was about 70 A.D. Herod built this fort for his own personal protection for various reasons. The guy said he had troubles of his own. No, let me tell you, he had lots of them. Kind of melodramatic. Anyway. And there are lots of cisterns. There's a huge one right down here, just massive. It's called the Great Cistern. This complex here is called the Western Palace. And it has, again, you'll want to walk through there. I probably won't guide you at that point, but another two, I think there's two beautiful mosaic floors down there, just fantastic. These are casemate walls. They have an outer wall and an inner wall, and there's a room in between. And usually in times of peace, that you use those rooms for bedrooms and storerooms and kitchens and whatever. In times of war, they could be filled in with dirt, rocks, rubble, whatever else, and make a more solid wall. One thing that the revoltists did in that story of the mass suicide, they deliberately left heaps of weapons, heaps of armament. They left the doors open to their storehouses, and the cisterns were full. They said, "We are not giving up." I mean, their statement by leaving all that was, "We're not giving up because we couldn't fight, because we didn't have enough resources. We're giving up because we don't want to be your slaves. We don't want to be at your mercy," to the Romans.
Cultic offerings with gold and copper, and one of them was a small copper snake, which we have in the context of the wilderness with the Israelites. That when the Israelites learned they had to go around Edom, see over there, that's Edom. They had to go around Edom. Edom wasn't going to let them go up and over and then up. They had to go all the way down to Elat, like we're going to go, and then around. They started to complain, and they had this plague of snakes. And somehow the vehicle of their punishment was also instrumental in their healing, in their salvation. Don't ask me how. I think it's like this. Death is their punishment, but somehow the death of the Messiah is instrumental in our salvation. Okay, even so, as Moses lifted up the servant in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, and he will draw all men unto himself.
Our model is built according to the biblical measurement, which is the cubit. It's the elbow length. Now, everyone's cubit is different, so we have what we think is an average 42 centimeter cubit. We haven't used any of the original materials now. We don't want to give the rabbis the idea we're trying to actually recreate a holy place. It's only a model for teaching purpose. Now, the camp would have been in an orderly fashion around 3 tribes to each side. 3, 3, 3, 3, and the largest tribe, the tribe of Judah, to the east side. All the other nations made their temples facing east to pay homage to the sun god. Now, this is very bad news in Israel, to pay homage to the sun god. The best we can figure is a priest goes in here, he gives his back to the sun god. Hathor, Ra, all the different representations of the sun god. So the priest is the one that takes it in, and he offers it up as a sacrifice on the altar. Ready to go in? Okay, this is the altar. It's made from acacia wood now, and it's covered in gold. I'm sorry, it's covered in copper. People ask, how is it that the wood would not have burned? Well, we know that if you cover it completely so the air doesn't get to it, copper is very resistant metal to fire. And the word for sacrifice now in Hebrew is interesting. It's korban, and to sacrifice is lahakriv. It's related to the word near in Hebrew, or lihit karev is to come near to. So the idea is that people are outside and God is inside. To come near to God, you have to, if you want the lihit karev, to come near to, you have to lahakriv, offer a sacrifice. But here it's not to appease an angry God, but to come near to our Maker. Right? Okay, you see the horns? The system of justice, if someone kills a relative, you have to take you have to take vengeance. What if it was an accident, though? Later, the elders will determine if it was murder or manslaughter, and the punishment would be according to that. But in the meantime, you're seeking his life. You're seeking him to take his life. If he holds on to the horns of the altar, you can't touch him. And this reminds us of the book of Luke, chapter 1, where it says, he sprung up among us a horn of salvation. Hang on to Jesus and you escape the avenger. You see, it's made from boards. Each one is a cubit and a half wide, and it's 10 cubits high. And it has the rings, and the poles go through the rings, and this is what holds it together. And then it's set in the silver, excuse me, the silver base. Now there were 5 of these poles that went through, and the lizard there, he wasn't there at that time. It's a little gecko, yeah. But you see, it's wood, it's acacia wood with gold. So it reminds us of the divinity and the humanity together in one structure. It reminds us of the Messiah. Okay? And the middle one, you can't see it because it goes through the wood. It reminds us of like the love, the tie that binds. The invisible tie that binds. Can you hear me back there? Yeah. Okay, now let's look at the coverings. The coverings are the sky blue, and reminding us of heaven. And the purple was an expensive dye made from a sea urchin that we have here in this region. Remind us of the royalty. And then we have the red, remind us of the blood of the sacrifices. Then we have the white, linen, remind us of the purity. And this is linen made from flax, right? On the north side we have the table of showbread, in Hebrew lechem hapanim. Panim is face or presence bread, like the presence of God. So it's unleavened bread, like in Passover. And then we have nesech, which is a libation, a drink offering. Unleavened bread and wine. What does that remind you of? Yeah, Passover with Jesus. Okay. Now, there would have been 12, one for each tribe, representing his complete people. Now, the punishment for anyone who eats this who's not a priest is onish karet. He would be cut off from his people. But we do know of someone who ate this and nothing happened to him. You remember who that was?
David.
Yeah. The Christians always get that one right. It's made of solid gold, and it's lit with the finest of olive oil. Different kinds of olives crushed together to make the oil that will be the light for the holy place. The priest, he's dressed in fine linen, representing the purity of his job. They're the ones that, only ones that do, their job is to offer the sacrifices and to come in here. Keep the light going, the bread, the incense. All his clothes are described, made from fine linen, which is flax, except for his shoes. Apparently they came in barefooted. Now in the temple they would have had the veil similar to this. It's very thick, it's called a topach, which is a hand-width thick, so you can't just tear it. It's not like your bed sheet back home. And it's very tall, you see, you can't reach up there. So when Jesus died and the veil was torn, this was to show that a man did not do it. It was done by God. So the high priest is the only one at this point that can go in. And since there's no door, apparently he goes down underneath, humbly. But first there's a series of sacrifices. He has to offer a bull, and he offers then a ram and 2 goats. One goat is the scapegoat. On the hem of his garment, he has the bells and the pomegranates. The pomegranates have, they have 613 seeds. The same number of the law, in the book of the law.
That breastplate.
Okay, this is the holy place. Everything is to scale. The cherubim now would have been on each side facing each other. They're solid gold. as is the mercy seat, which in Hebrew is the kapolet. It's made of solid gold. Kapolet comes from the root kapara, or atonement. So a literal translation of this would not be mercy seat, it would be atonement covering. So the presence of the Almighty comes between the cloud, the wings of the cherubim. They undo the veil and cover it. Without, then God's not there. Well, God's everywhere, but symbolically He's not here in the fire. Right. So then it can be dismantled and carried. Now wherever the pillar stops, that's where we pack up camp again. So we're not lost. We're following the presence of the Lord, which is a good idea. Okay, so we have Aaron's rod, the budded. Why did Aaron's rod bud? Because the other tribes were complaining, hey, that's not fair. Why is it that only the Levites can come in here? Moses says, let's not fight. Let's see what God says. So each tribe bring your staff, and the next day Aaron's staff budded. And then it said that manna, it tastes like honey cakes, but it looked like coriander seed. Which if you're from the south, is cilantro.
It's what?
Cilantro seed.
Cilantro.
Cilantro. Okay, and then we have the law. Now this is interesting because the mercy seat, you see it has the lip, it's called the zer, and so the blood won't spill off. This is where the blood goes. We have God's presence, we have God's holy law, God's provision, but we still don't have a way to deal with sin. If we don't have the blood on the mercy seat, then God meets us at the law. And that's a problem because we would then have to be judged accordingly, and we've all broken the law. You see? So what we have is the covering of blood, the kapara, and that provides temporary provision that makes a temporary provision for sin. But you see, in my way of thinking, it's still a problem because every year he has to come back. And when the Messiah comes, he says, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. It's no longer just a covering, it's taken away.
There's various ways to
But they just model it. They just know they have.
Trying to do it.
just close that door.
There was
Partly in the
it was
desert
all
because it
flat,
has
and then
tributaries that
the
branch
water
out all over
came
the place.
and
So that's
dug
a
down.
wide catchment area. But the main branch is right beyond us there, and then it drains into the Dead Sea, the border of the promised land, of the land of Canaan, which was given to Israel as they're coming up out of Sinai. They're staying at Kadesh Barnea. In Numbers chapter 34, the Lord said to Moses, "Command the Israelites and say to them, when you enter Canaan, that the land that will be allotted to you as an inheritance will have these boundaries. You'll start on the southern side. We're south. Most of the promised land is going to be north. The southern side will include some of the wilderness of Zin along the border of Edom. Edom controlled this territory south of us when the Israelites were coming in. On the east, your southern border will start from the end of the Salt Sea. Okay, that's the Dead Sea. Cross south of the Scorpion Pass, continue along the desert of Zin, going south of Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea is in that way, more or less in the direction of where the sun is. So the Dead Sea is up in that direction, the wilderness of Zin is draining. Actually toward it, but it's coming in our direction like this, diagonally to Kadesh Barnea, and then the border joins into the Mediterranean at the Brook of Egypt. It's not the Nile River, that's the River of Egypt. The Brook of Egypt is another canyon system, drainage system that drains the Sinai. To our right will be outside of Canaan, the Promised Land. The area we're going to travel in from now on will be back in the Promised Land. You can see an Israeli settlement there, started by David Ben-Gurion, among others. He was traveling through from Eilat one time. He saw a little settlement of young kids there trying to live in the land of Israel. And he said, I'm going to come join you. He's Prime Minister of Israel. And at one point, he comes and lives there. That's where he retired, more or less. Right on the border of the Promised Land, looking right into the desert of Zin. It wasn't a coincidence that he chose that spot, because he knew about the scriptures as well. It's called Sadeh Boker, the fields of the cowboy.